So I recently finished a book called Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead from Sheryl Steinberg. This thing on Amazon Reviews has like 4,000 plus reviews, 4.5 stars, so it's highly recommended. So as a leadership book, and she being a rather successful woman actually, I decided to pick it up and read it. I've heard good things. I had it recommended to me, and I was not impressed. Let's start with the good things first. Let's go through that, because it gave me a couple thoughts, and I thought I'd articulate it after I point out what was good and bad in this book as a sight read, I guess I should say. I actually listened to the audio and not the actual textbook. I got the audio version, and was able to go through that rather quickly because I'm trying to read 3 or 4 books at this time, and it's kind of difficult to keep up. But anyways, I digress. So it's the good things. The good things out of this book include that she had several life lessons that were very influential to her, but she kind of glossed over them, which is unfortunate. For example, she was very fortunate to, right out of college, get an internship at a very prestigious company and work for the government initially. She met a lot of people, including U.S. senators, and networked herself quite well. She later moved into Silicon Valley, and she talks about meeting her husband and doing all this other stuff, what she gets into in her book a little bit about work-life balance and things like that. And a lot of it I found to be rather helpful, actually. If you were looking toward a book on how to be more successful in the workforce, in general, in fact, not just for women, but in general, it's pretty enlightening. And I actually did get something out of this that I'll get into in a second regarding women in the workforce in particular. But here's the bad thing. So every time she made a salient point, every time she made a really good articulated point about how she was doing well, or maybe cited some data that demonstrated a point, she would immediately go into feminism and basically culture it all up. It was rather disgusting, to say the least. She gave a anecdotal evident point of being treated sexist. One of her favorite things to go over a few times, actually, not just once, but several times, was that she had a client in one of her first roles that tried to keep on getting her hooked up with his son or something like that. Rather kind of a piggy thing to do, to be honest. Very douchebaggery. That kind of stuff is not acceptable anymore. Never was to begin with. I have to be honest about that. But it's she brought it up a few times as if it was an offensive point. And sure, I'm pretty sure the guy that was doing it probably meant well, but it was very ignorant of the current time. She's in there for the experience, for her career, and not to meet a husband. She later got married and had kids, and then learned about choosing between a life at home or a life at work. And she constantly found that she could find balance in doing both, which is great. Some people can. But then that's where feminism stepped in for her. Apparently, every woman should be just like her, career ambitious, never work from home, never work out of the home, never actually be a stay-at-home mom, or do those type of things, because, well, it's just holding women back. Women often hold themselves back, is what she kept on saying, and they would make the decision between working or raising children. I found this to be an idiotic diatribe of vomit, to be honest. It's been proven through a couple studies that the more free society is, the more gender roles tend to come up. And she has a real issue with gender roles because she is what you would consider a postmodern feminist. She believes that society is the one that indentures these roles into people, and it's just not right or normal. We're put those gender roles are put on to you by society in general. They're taught to you. She gave a couple more anecdotal examples where she was talking about a person's daughter who was at like a career fair type thing where you say, this is my dad and they do this, and this is my mom or they do this, right? And this person's daughter said, this is my dad, they're an architect, he builds buildings. This is my mom, she's an author and a columnist or something like that, and she travels often but never picks me up from school. And that's what she thought was important, but apparently instead of realizing that her daughter wants to be like all the other kids, or her daughter would really like to see mom pick her up from school and not some random person like grandma or whoever else is doing it, she's like, well, I was offended that society put this in her head. Never once stopping to think that maybe that's what the daughter wants, to see more of mom and not less. As if that was a bad thing. As if the choice of mother, a choice of being a mother as a career is a bad thing. Something my wife chooses to do. Ironically, I try to convince her to go to work more than stay home, and she just doesn't want to. Yet this is what's holding my wife back, apparently, according to Cheryl here. My wife is holding herself back because she chooses not to have a job. I convinced her to go get at least a degree in case I die, that she has something to make money out of, and she can sustain the family, have a house that she's not going to lose or anything like that, and still be able to make money. So she went and did that at least, but that's as far as she went. But, encouragement doesn't mean enforcement. And the thing that bugged me the most is she used very authoritarian terms throughout this entire book. It was, women need to do this, more women need to do this, and more women need to do that. And then she would say something like, she would like, at the end, she said that she would like to see more men doing more work at home, so taking care of half of the housework. Gender parity, literally. 50-50 split of the housework, and 50-50 split of normal work, career. But here's the caveat. She seems to think that men don't need any support or encouragement in their careers or choice and outlook because, well, they're men. They run society already, right? That's an easy choice. But, women need that extra level of support because they just don't get it. They're often criticized by other women, ironically. She points that out several times in her book and fails to see that women bully other women into these gendered roles, as she wants to call them, as if they're societally influenced, knowing that she actually says that she wants to be more reflective and self-critical, but then fails to be self-critical that she is an outlier in this situation. She is a minority amongst the CEOs and other executive leaders. Why? Why is that? She thinks that society is the reason why, that women are just held back naturally, and men are the ones that are doing it, apparently, because there's a lot of quips in here about by men, ran by men, mostly men. It was repeated in every chapter from beginning to end that clearly men are the problem, even though she tries to say that they're not, but often points to men being the problem. Very hypocritical in this book. But the thing that annoyed me out of that, and this is the point that I wanted to get to, and kind of a salient point to bring this all together, she constantly, and I do mean constantly, pointed to men as being the problem, pointing to men as having attributes that she didn't have. One of the ones that I thought was pretty interesting that she just glossed over was self-confidence. That women lack the self-confidence to lead and step up and be leaders in their society and take the management role and take all the guff and issues that come with it. And she's sick of people pointing out that she's a female COO. And she doesn't like the fact that they have to put female on COO. She'd rather just be COO. While this would be all well and good, she's an anomaly, something of a special attribute. She's a unique person. She's somebody that stands out. This is a good thing, to be a role model as a female in a executive leader position. She also networked her way up like everyone else did and competed against men. And this is where I thought a little bit of psychology might help in her leadership ability, in addition to blaming men for everything. And hopefully she'll be self-critical. She's friends with Susan Wojcicki, the person that runs YouTube, so hopefully this will bleed over to her as well. Although, with the way the views of my channel goes nowadays, thanks to YouTube censorship and Twitter censorship and pretty much all social media censorship, that I am a disparate position, so no one really listens to me unless I really get my name out there and try to network my own way up, which I'm trying, but with the new algorithms that pretty much, have to fight against the machine, as it were. But anyways, I digress. The interesting thing that I thought I'd bring out of it was from the psychological aspect. And I noticed something. This is something that feminists do in general, especially the man-hating feminists, and psychology in general, because the ethos right now is that male psyche or male ego and male behaviors are toxic by its very nature of being male. Hence, hegemonic masculinity and toxic masculinity. If you want to see more of those, just look in my playlist under the toxic masculinity and the male privilege videos. I pretty much do a deep dive into the origins of that nonsense. But I think the point is the male psyche is rather unique. We are aggressive. We have outlets for this aggressiveness, but many of those outlets have been taken away. Many of those outlets have been not nourished, but destroyed. So it's now a diatribe of crap that we have to deal with. And that male psyche tends to be pathologized into non-existence, I guess is an interesting way of putting it. And this is what I think she misses as an ardent feminist, and others as well, is that they just don't understand how the male psyche works. And they're not taking the time to try and understand that either. So men are going to be the same way. They can't understand how women think necessarily. And this, I think, can be easily outlined by the way people bully. In fact, the hate mob that you'll see on Twitter and all the other social media networks when somebody writes a hit piece, or the Me Too movement, for example, where people's lives are ruined over having a bad date, or it started out actually quite noble, but then turned into a diatribe of bullshit. And I'm waiting for Sargon of Akkad's video on the Me Too movement when he finally finishes it, so you can see how crazy it's become. As it's rather easy to see, but it'd take a while to put that all together, and I know why he's taken so long to do that. But anyways, they haven't considered the male psyche, and I think that's their issue. That even in psychology, the male psyche, the aggressive, domineering, kind of hegemonic, if you want to put it that way, or not really tribalistic, but... Well, let's try to couch this into another species. In, let's say, our closest relatives, chimpanzees, for example, a bullying, domineering masculine male will rise to the top, but his leadership is short-lived. He will, the moment he discovers or shows any point of weakness, the next in line, the dominant but social male, will take over the troop and oftentimes murder the dictator at the top. This is normal behaviors within chimps. Human behavior is no different. We've had many a dictator try to rise to the top. The next in line leadership in that usually would band together of other like-minded individuals and throw together an allyship to topple the dictator. The easiest example is Hitler, of course, where he was the dominant dictator. He was toppled and overthrown by a collaboration of equally big leaders, but with a common goal and purpose. And we were able to achieve much that way. Sadly, much as this is lost today, because now we're back to tribal behaviors, unfortunately, but I digress. It's interesting to see that this simple thing of trying to understand what it's like to actually be a male is completely lost on feminism or the female psyche. They have a vision of what male and masculinity is. They've labeled it toxic for the most part. Toxic male behaviors are just unacceptable. And anybody that displays these toxic behaviors are clearly a problem for society. And yes, it can go to extremes, and yes, it's very true that the worst of us are outright murderers, as we've seen this last weekend. But I wonder how much of that is to blame on the pathologizing of males. To the best of my knowledge, we did not have this many mass shootings and killings until we started pathologizing male behavior, trying to limit or even squash it during adolescence and growing up. And it's become worse. So much so that now we're finding it expressed in the most violent and explosive of ways. Some of the worst places in the world display way over the top masculine behavior, and now basically wage war on the Western society. But back to the book, I don't think she's ever considered, at least stopping to consider, that she might be directly competing with men. And maybe that's why she's having so many issues. In my theory, in my hypothesis rather, because of course you'd have to test this to be sure, that you have now stepped into what was normally a male-dominated system, which is very true. You can call it a patriarchy if you like, but it was a competitive environment. And that competitive environment, for better or worse, was basically a use and tool of a status position to attract females, ironically. I mean, men try to rise to the top of the tribe and troop to attract the most females possible so that they can be the top of the food chain, the most attractive person out there, to gain the most attractive wife or wives, depending on how lecherous you are or how unvirtuous you are, if you want to put it that way. But this development is not anything new. It's been this way for hundreds of thousands of years. And feminism steps in and thinks that it's going to change it in a matter of, 3 or 4 generations? Maybe less? I don't see that as being a possibility. Yes, some of the notions have changed, and the technology has expanded our abilities, where women can do most of what men can do, except for the hard labor and the actual physical labor. All that's not possible for a woman. They lacked the physical strength to do it. Like, you're not going to... My dad was an iron worker, for example, and you don't see women lasting past lunchtime when it comes to building a bridge. Unless they're one of the butchy ones, the ones that look like they look like a dude. They've weightlifted more than men do, and they're just huge and buff and strong. So do they go to this job to prove what kind of a woman they are? They just like lifting shit. And yeah, some of the best female workers he ever had were butchy, as he put it, butchy dykes. Basically, they were pretty strong women when it came down to it, but they're actually still just women. They were really kind of cordial and liked to hang out with the guys rather than the girls. They just didn't quite fit in, obviously, because they're ripped, right? But that's neither here nor there. I think back to the book, she might need a perspective change, or a chance to challenge her perceptions. She asked for it in her book, and I doubt she's ever done it. I think that's a poor thing. She could do with challenging her own perceptions, maybe just a little bit, and maybe discovering that the male psyche is rather vulnerable. We take things a lot deeper. And because we're not expressive with our emotions as females are, one of the things that's been pathologized, like, mind you, is that men do not express their emotions outwardly. We don't let anybody see them, really. It's rare that it might happen. We've seen it a little bit more with the YouTube videos and whatnot of men expressing their feelings a little bit more. But when we do, it's usually because we're stuck. We have no alternative. It's just, we can't hold it back anymore. It's going to come out. And for better or worse, that's fine. But then when you pathologize us holding it in, as it is natural for us to do according to evolutionary psychology, and then expect us to behaviorally change as if society was the one imposing this upon us, well, going back to evolution, that's a sign of weakness, to show your emotions. You're supposed to be strong and sturdy, somebody reliable and dependable, somebody that everybody can look up to, that doesn't show weakness, that is always ready. It's been proven through leadership studies that people that actually show their weaknesses and open up that particular door build a better trust relationship with their followers, or even with the wives and whatnot. Even in relationships, it's been proven to be better to literally open up, for men anyways, to open up to women that you've never dared to do. Like, you express your full emotions, you let them know exactly how you feel, and truly kind of articulate how that is. is better for you. However, that is not the way male behavior works. And because women don't kind of understand that, it's been pathologized in psychology. And this is where I'm going to leave it with a thought, that maybe women in the workplace, when they're stepping into the workplace, I was thinking about this today, maybe they don't realize that in true equality, they are competing against men, so therefore men will treat them as a direct competitor. They both want the same position, and they're striving to get it. But maybe now women have an unfair advantage. And I think it's possible, considering books like hers and others show that they want gender parity. Well, gender parity isn't a reliable or altruistic outcome if all they want is representation. That does not mean you get the best for the job. That means you get equal representation, and whether they're good or not for the job. Women will strive to the top if they want the top. But it's an abnormality, a uniqueness, if you will, for women to want to strive to the top. So, sure, they can get support and whatnot from their peers, from their from a mentor, for example. But to expect two people to compete for the same job, and then the woman wins out because she's a woman, well, that's an unfair competitive advantage, because she can just cry gender parity or sexism or something of that nature and get what they want. We've seen this in the UK in particular. I can't remember the lady's name, but basically she was she did the news for China, I believe it was, and then somebody else that was doing the news for the US was getting paid a buttload more, plus is working full time, and it was a male, and she didn't like that, so she complained about it. So they offered her more money, and then goes, oh, it wasn't about the money. Well, her first complaint was about the money. Now it's about gender parity or something like that. It became ideological. And I think that's where Cheryl sits at this point. She's in the ideological. And she's not considering the male ego or the male psyche or even the behavior traits that go with it. There's a couple studies that I've read over leadership. Basically, one of the ones that's out recently, came out a couple years ago, really said that women could do better by learning some male behaviors, such as assertiveness and what was the other one? Not conscientiousness, but it was similar to that. It was self-confidence. And men could do better with learning some more of the altruistic or even feminine behaviors, such as openness and agreeableness, something that men are not very good with. They're usually better at standing out than opening up. So that's all I have for this. It was an interesting book, but I would, you know what, I'd actually recommend it for anybody that wants an insight of how leadership is with a feminist mindset. It's not too bad, but at the same time, I probably wouldn't pay for it. Go to the library and grab it up and read it. She's sold millions of copies. It's huge, international bestseller. Like I said, 4,000 plus reviews, and still 4.5 stars. It's pretty impressive. But at the same time, it's basically, I'm a woman, I'm a leader, and I'm a feminist, and I'm going to let you know that feminism rules in leadership, and sexism is real because patriarchy. That's pretty much how it read. But she did give some really good, solid, salient points that actually women probably could benefit from, to be honest, if they want to advance their career. That's all I got for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm trying to do a little bit more regular stuff, but it all depends if it's actually quiet in my house or not. And whenever my niece isn't here, that's probably when I'll be recording. So thank you.
I've completed my work. Time for me to go.